Well, I would like to welcome a first-time guest. And actually, I have to say this, Kyle, but my former boss to the podcast, we ended on a rough note. No, I'm just kidding. My former boss, Mr. Kyle Perry, first of all, welcome to the Sharpen podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I have been a listener for a while. I think it's really exciting what you're doing, so I'm honored to be a part of it.
I'm so honored that you would join us and make the time for this. You're a very busy. Like all our guests, we appreciate time on your schedule. Kyle, I got to know you, and we can maybe talk to a little bit of the context of when you were my manager. But I got to know you as a manager, but also in that particular role, certainly as a friend too. But tell us a little bit about who you are for those that are meeting you for the first time today.
Great, thanks, Kirby. So I'm first off, I'm a Catholic, I'm a husband, and I'm a farm boy from Nebraska. And I think really what I've done and who I am as a person boils down to those three things.
Yeah.
Really thankful for the upbringing that I had and the experiences along the way. Currently, I live in Omaha, Nebraska, where I work full-time for Farm Credit Services of America, and that's just one piece of who I am. But our careers are a large part of who we are. It's a large part of our identity. So very, very proud of what I do and who I work for, and that's one of the many pieces. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Tell us a little bit about, you mentioned the work that you're doing right now, and I mentioned some of the work that we had done together in the past, but tell us a little about the work that you're doing and even some previous roles and different industries, et cetera, that you've been involved with.
I'm currently the Customer Education Manager is the title. So I work for Farm Credit Services of America. We're a customer-owned financial cooperative based in Omaha. We serve agriculture, farmers and ranchers through their credit and risk management needs in 5 states that kind of surround Omaha. And my role is leading all of our customer-facing training, education, learning, and insights, which is a really fascinating role. A lot of what our business does is provide loans and crop insurance to farmers and ranchers. And because of our mission to be agriculture's most valued financial partner and our structure of being customer owned, it's our promise to help customers be better, help farmers and ranchers be better managers of their operations. We really want to see them succeed and really be a partner in their business. So my job is to lead the work that we do in adding that value. And currently today it looks like meetings and conferences and a few resources that we're starting to deliver digitally because we know that a lot of people either don't have time or can't make it or don't want to go in person. And so we want to be able to add value and reach farmers and ranchers in ways that they want. So it's a position that I took about just short of 2 years.
Wow.
Here.
Yeah.
And so I still feel like I'm getting my feet wet. The learning curve is still really steep, which I really enjoy. That's a situation that I thrive in. So I'm in Omaha now, but I spent prior to that about 7 years in Washington, D.C., working for the American Farm Bureau Federation. It's a nonprofit membership organization that represents farmers and ranchers. So while both of the organizations have the word farm in them, Farm Bureau and Farm Credit, their business models and their goals are very, very different. So in DC, I led the learning and development team, which was our leadership training, media and advocacy training, and then our organization development work. And really thankful for the 7 years that I got to spend in a really great organization, building skills, having great experiences, and then contributing to an industry that I know, Kirby, you and I both care a lot about, that being agriculture.
That's right. That's right. We worked together for a summer in DC as well. You talked about your time frame there with Farm Bureau for the National FFA organization with a summer event for students. And Kyle, I have to tell you, you were one of the first experiences of having a manager. And I remember, so you set the bar really high, first of all, but then also I remember distinctly, you would, instead of saying, this is what you need to do, you'd be like, well, what do you think about that? And I remember that was such a profound, like, wow, that, he didn't tell me what to do. He asked me what I thought I should do about that situation. And so, but one thing I've seen you, along with being a really great manager and asking very simple but complex questions, is I've seen you transition and make several transitions, whether that was maybe from post-secondary education into the workforce and then different roles. And you've not only made transitions, but you have seemed to transition very well. And so for today's conversation, I would just love to start there. I mean, as you've seen multiple transition in your career. Yes, but as you've said, the groups, the mission, the business model is very different. Kind of talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, what are some of those things that you were thinking, okay, I did that and I did that really well, and others, if you're like me, you're like, I did that and that did not go well, or I was not aware of that in those transitions?
Great points. And to reference back to our experience working together, those are some really kind words. It means a lot to me, but it was also very easy being your manager too, Kirby. So
he's just saying that because he's on a podcast recording. You should hear what he says offline.
I just want to make sure that it is on the record because it's 100% the truth. That was a great experience, a short one, and learned a lot. So, excuse me. Yeah, the transitions are really interesting. I think we go through very small transitions day to day. I think it's important that we're intentional about designing those transitions, whether that be, the world changes. So if we don't change, we're going to get left behind. So even if it's in the same role, I think there's transitions that happen day to day in the way that we do our role and the way that we learn how to do our roles better. And then there's big transitions, and that's life stages, getting married, having kids, buying a house. And then there's career and professional transitions, and those have all different flavors, shapes, and sizes. And for me, my experience has been all within a similar sort of career area. It's all been learning and development focused. It's just been channeled different directions. So whether that's leadership development, nonprofit organization development, now in financial and business acumen training, or managing learning programs, or instructional design, it's all kind of come back to learning and development. So I think as young professionals look at career transitions, which there's stereotypes and there's actual data that shows the number of transitions and careers that people make, or career transitions people make, and doing those regardless of what the cadence or the time is, making sure that they're intentional and that they're part of a core. So I made a transition at Farm Bureau from director of leadership development, where I was primarily doing just leadership training, to having the great opportunity when my boss, Margie Wolf, took a chance on me and promoted me to lead the team. And so that broadened the set of responsibilities to include a few more things as well. And so that transition, and we can dig into what that meant too, because that was an internal transition. And then 2 years ago, making the transition geographically to Nebraska, which wasn't a total blind change because I grew up in Nebraska, and also making the change to a new role in a new company. And all of those have similar strategies I think we can employ as young professionals, but they all look and feel very, very different.
Why don't you go back? You said something about, a part of the core. Can you tell us what that has meant for you, or what you would encourage young professionals how to think about that, and what you're meaning there?
I think at the core, it's this strong belief that successful organizations place a lot of stock in their people, and they do that by giving them opportunities to succeed in ways that they can develop. And not just their people or their employees, but the people that they do business with, which is where I'm at right now, and providing education and learning opportunities for our customers, because our customers are so important to us, and we really kind of in some ways obsess over our customers and really want them to be successful, and we got to think about that from a systems and big picture approach. So that is at the core where my professional career has gone. It's been focused on developing people, and that was a cool experience that you and I had, living in DC for a summer and developing high school students who many times got on an airplane and left their hometown for the first time to go to Washington, DC and get a really cool leadership development experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And then these dots come together throughout your career. Some that you intentionally plan, and others that, you know, they are maybe a surprise, but then they're not, right? Because you've been doing the small things that lead to the big things. I would love to hear, you talked about you had been able to make a couple of types of transitions, and you talked about the one internally within the company, but then also moving from, you know, one very different drastic move, and maybe not in the sense of that, you know, that was somewhat home state, but it was very much a change. So let's go back to that internal bit, because as you know, our listeners are those that are in the first 10 years of their career. And I could see that being something they're like, I'm actually about to make this transition, or I would like to make an internal transition. Can you share with us what you've learned there, best practices? And then, like I said, if you're like me, the not so best practices sometimes. We learn from our mistakes, right?
Yeah, I got a lot of them.
Okay,
And
me too.
that transition, as I look back on it, there's two things that, and this is just my opinion and my advice. It's one of many places that folks can get advice and opinions. The two things that really helped accelerate and make that transition successful, and I say successful, not smooth, because any transition, if you try and make it smooth, you're going to set yourself up for failure from the start. So to make that transition successful, one is to focus on value. So there's a book called The First 90 Days. I've read that book twice now. And it all centers around this principle of getting a net positive return out of our effort. And so anytime you make a career transition, the organization or company is investing a lot in you as a transitioning or new employee. And the goal is to tip the scale so that the net contribution is greater than the net cost. And that's really the premise of the book. And they walk through a number of steps and ways to do that. But I think the first thing is seek opportunities to add value. And sometimes that's low-hanging fruit and quick wins. The other way to do that is to start to build a long-term vision or strategy for where you want to be, because different personalities and different perspectives in the organization are going to want to see the tactical day-to-day work, and others are going to want to see the long-term vision and how it aligns with the goals of the company. So simultaneously doing both of those things with the goal of adding value, not recklessly fast, but in an expedited way to show that you're contributing value. The other part, and it's very much about value as well, and that's about building relationships. So probably the most important relationship initially is with your direct supervisor or boss, manager. We have a unique culture at Farm Credit Services of America where I don't have a boss, I have a leader, which is a really cool part of our culture. Yeah. And so building a relationship with my leader is very important. That's not the only relationship that's important. And those other relationships look very different. There's relationships according to power or position, and those are important. There's a lot of other relationships, and maybe it's the person that schedules meeting rooms or takes care of some things that are really sort of a linchpin in making sure that the work that you need to do is successful. So find out those relationships and then intentionally build them. There's the saying that people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care, and really building relationships on a personal level, I think, is important.
Oh, those are such great points. Obviously, now we have a book recommendation, and we will be sure to include that in show notes today. So be sure to check out The First 90 Days. I do want to go back where you're talking about adding value and looking for ways to do that really quickly. And sometimes it's that low-hanging fruit. Could you give us an example of a time, whether maybe that was an internal transition or from maybe your Farm Bureau to your Farm Credit role, an example of a way that you did that pretty quickly on the job?
Yeah, so this example does not tip the scale in terms of a net positive contribution, but it was a quick one. So when I started at Farm Credit Services of America, my second week on the job was our annual conference for young, beginning, and small customers in Omaha. We're about 200 customers come to Omaha for a conference. That was week 2 on the job, so I take no credit for all the planning that happened before that, but I was responsible for the on-site coordination and a lot of the logistics that happened that week. One of the things was getting speaker introductions in place. And in my previous experience, I had trained people on how to introduce speakers. So I had a very simple formula that was a 4-part formula, answers 4 questions. And so we were very quickly and easily able to put together the introductions, hand them off to whoever got up on stage to introduce the speaker, and it was almost like a non-event. So what would have been another task for someone else to accomplish was something that we could just quickly achieve and get it done. So it was something that I was able to in the very first week, just say, hey, here's something we can get done quickly.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a great example. I remember when I started Kyle on a roll, and we were adopting Salesforce into, and I remember making the comment of being like, this is so easy. It's just kind of like Facebook and somebody laughed, but then they were like, you mean this is intuitive? I was like, yeah. And so pretty quickly that became a lead on the team, and whether it was technology. And I just remember, being able to add value not only to the company, but also to your teammates. I love that you spoke to that too, of thinking about the multiple relationships, because sometimes it's so easy to think the only person I'm really trying to win over right now is that boss, manager, leader, whatever that looks like. And I love that you draw out, hey, you're a part of a bigger group. It's not just that one person. So I think that's a really important call out. And you talked to building relationships. That's something that it certainly does take time to build relationships. However, you can be intentional about forming relationships quickly. And you mentioned maybe casting that net a little bit wider than who you're thinking about. But do you have any helpful tips of, you're the new guy or the new gal in the office? Has there been anything that stood out to you as ways to form relationships more quickly and maybe more deeply in some workplaces that you've been?
I look for opportunities to get involved in the organization outside of the actual day-to-day and job description tasks. For about a year, so shortly into my first year, I applied to be a part of a cross-functional team that put together an innovation event that we did in the company, and fortunately got selected to be a part of that. And that was huge in building relationships with about 8 or 10 other people who also worked on that cross-functional work group. And that served a lot of purposes. One, very selfishly, it helped me kind of create a community and build some roots in the organization.
Yeah.
Up until recently, I was a team of 1, uniquely positioned actually on a lending team. So it at times could be a little lonely because I'm working in an area that's different and speaks a different language than a lot of the people on the same team as me. So it really helped to build some relationships and build some community, which is important. I think Gallup says that one of the indicators of an engaged employee is that they say they have a friend at work. And I think that friend can be defined differently. So that really helped. It also has paid a lot of dividends in the project work that I do. So if I need to bounce an idea off of someone or just check for understanding to make sure that I'm understanding something correctly, there's a lot of people that I've got on speed dial that can quickly answer a question, and we've got an established relationship and rapport with that we can get right to a core question, and then also a way to keep connected with folks.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So you talked a lot there about that internal transition and gave us some really kind of helpful, practical things to think about, to do. I would love to hear about when you've made a transition, and we'll call it from company to company, right? That external one. So tell us a little bit about that experience, key learnings, and takeaways there.
One thing that this is kind of core to who I am is I really value the network of people, and so that means maintaining connections, and even after departing my previous organization at Farm Bureau, maintaining a lot of really solid connections that I really value there. And then not expecting that I'm going to replicate the exact same thing to where I'm headed. The other part is taking care of myself, and I probably depart a little bit in the sense that what stereotypically that means,
it's not a pedicure for you?
I've done that once in my life, and I have no desire to do another one. I don't get how that's relaxing.
I got to ask Catherine a little bit more, but anyhow,
Yeah,
carry
it's a
on.
great story.
Carry on.
But I think it's about, it's about intentionally deciding to show up in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Employee engagement, I believe, is every employee's responsibility, and
That's good.
taking care of yourself means taking care of that 6-inch space between your ears, and blanket positivity and masking over challenges or problems isn't a good approach. But it's about believing that there's going to be a positive outcome, and if there's not, there need to be some changes made. So in transitioning to a new company, there's establishing new norms, building new relationships, understanding cadence and business model, and how communication and decisions happen. And so there's a lot of questions. I had to ask a lot of questions. And then when things didn't make sense, or when things weren't quite clicking, speaking up and talking to my manager, my manager's manager, to say, hey, this isn't working right now, and here's the idea that I have for how to fix it. What perspective do you have on the ways that we can go about doing that? And we can't just sit back and expect that it's going to work out. We've got to be courageous in making things work well.
And it is certainly courageous when you are somewhat newer in a company that you're sharing there. So you were talking about not only figuring out the cadence and the dynamics of the workplace, the new relationships, the structures, all the acronyms. Oh, my lands. But even just figuring out what you're supposed to be doing, right? Like as we call it, like your day job.
Yeah.
I know that sometimes it'll get, coined, you don't know what you don't know. So when you don't know what you don't know, have you found anything to be helpful? I mean, you were talking about asking questions and offering solutions, but in terms of just figuring out your job, because you may have a really strong background of something and it may not be brand new, but still there's a whole heck of a lot to figure out. Have you found anything to be particularly helpful on just learning your job? Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I don't have an answer. I can tell
Okay.
you that, I'm still figuring that out. I think we all are, right?
Yeah.
There's places, very technically, just ask your coworkers, hey, what does this mean? Because a lot of times when you ask what one thing means, you're going to uncover the answers to 5 other questions that you didn't know you had. Mm-hmm. And that just takes you got to extend yourself some grace. It's going from a company where I was at for 7 years. It was very automatic, and a lot of things were habitual, and relationships were established. So I'm really thankful that the folks that I work with my leader and my leader's leader extend a lot of grace to me, and learning the business, and getting up to speed to apply the skills that I've acquired elsewhere. So I think extend yourself some grace, and then just be direct when you don't understand something, because like I say, you'll probably uncover a number of other answers to questions you didn't know you had, kind of back to your point of you don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about you too. I've found with each year of age, I'm far more comfortable now than I was when I started the role I was in, of saying, hey, I don't understand this. Could you share, especially to my more seasoned teammates who might have done the job for 30 years, to make that call and say, hey, I'm trying to figure this out, and I know you've been doing this for quite some time, or maybe it's a customer. I learned so much from our customers to say, well, what do you think about this? I'm new here, and you probably have I know you have far more perspective. I'm so much more comfortable now, and I don't know about you, Kyle, but if I could go back 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, different stages, and say, you need to get comfortable at that. That actually probably shows a whole lot more maturity, don't you think? But for those that are listening, we have an audience in that college age, some that are about to graduate, some that are potentially in graduate school about to enter into the marketplace. I kind of gave an example of what I wish someone might have said, especially in the middle of a transition. Is there anything else like that comes to mind to you as you think about that particular group that you would offer as an encouragement?
Yeah, you make a really good point, Kirby, that the desire to want to add value can sometimes result in missteps, mm-hmm. because you're trying so hard to have the right answer, or have a answer in general. And I am continually impressed when and this happens very frequently. I'll be in a meeting with senior leaders and they'll get asked a question and the response is, I don't know, or I don't know yet, or we're figuring it out, or we're working on that. And that is a perfectly acceptable answer. Probably not every time. Eventually we've got to solve the problems, right?
Sure.
But I think that is something that could be easily misinterpreted. So I'm really glad that you bring that up, that adding value doesn't mean having all the answers. Adding value means being clear about what you know, being clear about what you know that you don't know and that you're figuring out, and then being authentic and realistic about learning what you don't know that you don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think to me a key piece here is not only, like you said, adding the value, but making sure that you have a self-awareness in all of this what you were just sharing. So, I I think that many of our audience members, whether or not they've already made a transition or they're about to, you shared today, we really focused on those workplace kind of more centered conversations, but we always say Sharpen is to sharpen young professionals for the workplace and beyond. Is there anything, you think about just simply packing up your belongings and moving from Washington, D.C. to Nebraska? So you think about outside of the workplace, anything else there too, from a helpful kind of practical perspective? You're like, here's some other key things to know when you make transitions, kind of that out of the workplace piece as well.
Oh man, now you're asking about something that I think is really, really something that is a good challenge to be intentional about, because if you ignore it, it'll probably creep up and bite you bigger and faster than workplace, because we have feedback loops built into the workplace intentionally because they're good for business. We don't always necessarily have automatic feedback loops built into our life. And sometimes when it rears its ugly head, it's when it's too late. It affects our health or our relationships or just our sanity. So
yeah, for sure.
I can speak to what not to do, as well as what you're hearing. You talked about making mistakes and learning from them. One thing that I'm very thankful for in this transition is an amazing wife. Catherine has.
She is amazing. I'll vouch. Yeah,
she is. So she kept her same job when we moved to Nebraska, and so she works out of the home and then travels quite a bit. And I think probably going from working in an office to working from home is as big, if not bigger, transition than going from one company to another, because for the same reasons that there's feedback loops built into the workplace, there's support mechanisms built into new employees coming into an organization. There aren't always necessarily the support mechanisms for employees that are staying with the company but are going to work home-based or out of the office. And so really thankful for an amazing wife, and focusing on our relationship has been something that's really important, and that admittedly I haven't always done well. And so I've learned a lot from that. And those are the things that we've got to continue to do. And if you're married or not married, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a person that's located physically in the same place as you, because our networks and the ability to connect with people is a unique place that we're in society. Can also be a little misleading too, because we can keep connections at a surface level very easily. And when moving or transitioning from one place to another, it's important to maintain the deliberate and intentional connections that are going to add the most value in terms of keeping a well-rounded person. I think the other two parts are finding purpose and ways to devote energy outside of the workplace and outside of the home. So I took up the habit of flying airplanes. I got my pilot's license when I moved to Nebraska, which is a blast.
That's awesome, Kyle.
Yeah, I've
seen a couple of social media posts around that, so I've been interested to learn more. That's cool.
Yeah, and then the other part is to build community.
Yeah,
and be intentional about whether that's church, where you live. Community can take a lot of different shapes, right? And so building community is important too, because it's not just about work, right? Like work is where we spend a lot of our time, but the whole person and being fulfilled and satisfied is all those things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know about you too. I find myself, I'll spend time with folks of calling it, your creating community. It doesn't just exist. You cultivate it.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be so interesting. It's almost like, and you with your background could probably explain the neurobiology of this, but it's almost like when you're the most relaxed and you're hanging out on a back porch and they're talking about something, and then I'll end up getting an idea for work. And not that that's what it's about, but there is this like such cool part of learning from people and different generations and different backgrounds. There's a diversity of thought when you cultivate community that is, diverse in thought. And so I found that to be such a refreshing thing sometimes going into Monday, where I'm like, I never would have thought of that had so-and-so not brought this up in the context of teaching in the classroom, or whatever that looks like. So, well,
some of our best ideas can come from places that aren't necessarily in the middle of that idea.
Yes. One of my teammates was driving his 8 children and spouse back home from the Grand Canyon and had one of the best ideas for a very customer facing piece of communication. We've received great feedback. And so I was like, when did you get this idea? It's very simple. Like, why haven't we done this sooner? And he was like, it was about 2 a.m. driving home. It was so funny. But that headspace, clearing that headspace is so important. So, well, Kyle, I appreciate what you've shared today. I mean, you've shared some good examples and some great stories, and we've talked about several transitions. I think that this episode's really going to meet a lot of young professionals where we are, and thinking through those steps. But I've heard you say this before too, whether it's internal transition and external one, kind of go back to where you're talking about at the beginning, but it really is, it's almost like a combination of these intentional steps along the way with a life kind of surprises and not exactly planning for things to happen. And to me, it's been so fun getting to watch your career take that, where it's certainly strategic and intentional, but it seems like to me there's also been some fun surprises along the way.
Yeah, I think the road looks a lot different through the front windshield as it does through the rear view mirror. And having gone through transitions, it's easy to look back and say, be intentional and make deliberate decisions and build relationships. But the beauty in it is the surprises along the way too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we always end every episode, as you know, asking our guests 2 questions. The first one is more of a favor, but we'd love for you to make a shout out today to a person or a group of people to be able to express your appreciation.
Yeah, so the first shout out is to my wife. She supports me. She encourages and challenges me to be a better person every day, and then really supports us. And she got to take on that challenge after my parents did for a number of years. So really my wife and my parents. And then the second is a group of people. And that's the folks who have taken a chance on and put their faith in me. So my first boss out of college, Jill Caston, who's a great mentor and friend. Margie Wolf, who took a chance on me and promoted me to my first leadership position and is a great coach, probably one of the best coaches I've ever got to work with. And then my current leader, Carl, who encourages me to think big. So, and I'm not unique. There's a lot of folks out there that are doing that. So shout out to everyone that takes a chance on somebody.
Yeah, nope, that's right. That's right. And those that engage in those types of mentor coaching relationships too. Yeah. Well, we'd also love to hear what's been a game changer for you. And it could be something here recently, or maybe it was something in the past, 10 or 15 years.
I was thinking about that one a little bit, and every game changer or experience or learning opportunity kind of found its way back to a common thread, and that was an experience in FFA, Future Farmers of America, which, Kirby, that's how you and I know each other. That's how I got my first job. That's ultimately the connection to how I've got every job in life.
Yes.
It's how I met my wife, most of my close friends. So that for me has been a game changer. And why is because it allowed me to be a part of something bigger than myself and develop skills that are relevant and applicable to lots of areas of life, personal and professional. So even young professionals, there's a lot of young professionals that probably listen to this that have been in FFA, and a lot that didn't. And so it's not about FFA, it's about being a part of something bigger than yourself and realizing that those early decisions compound throughout life. So take advantage of them.
No, that's so good. I thought you were going to say your puppy, Kyle, was the game changer.
that has been a game changer. Yes, definitely. But probably a different type of game changer.
That's right. That's right. Well, still precious. Thank you for joining us today.